Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, please allow me to thank members who have spoken on this bill for their broad support and comments. Let me now address some of the comments raised. Members have raised several points on the scope of the regulation of fundraising appeals. Mr. Louis Ng, Mr. Dennis Tan have made certain inquiries about the scope of fundraising appeals. The amendments that we have made, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the amendments that we propose in this bill serve to clarify the definition, not extend its scope. All fundraising appeals, whether online or offline, whether for local or foreign purposes, have been and continue to be subject to the Act. The Act also imposes obligations on persons and organizations raising funds or receiving the funds raised. A person raising funds via an online fundraising platform for a needy family will contravene the law if the funds raised are not applied to the said cause. A charity that is in the service of providing nursing care for the elderly has an obligation under the law to ensure that any unsolicited donation it receives is applied to the said object. So therefore, the examples that Mr. Louis Ng and also the point raised by Mr. Dennis Tan about small-scale private fundraising activities, unsolicited donations, are therefore bound by the Act. However, we are mindful not to stifle giving while safeguarding public interest. We recognize that fundraising appeals come in a wide range of scale and complexity, from big sales to nationwide campaigns. As explained in my earlier speech, we regulate fundraising activities through the Charities Fundraising Appeals for Local and Foreign Charitable Purposes Regulations 2012 in a risk-adjusted approach. In practice, we have exempted all appeals for local causes from the requirement to apply for permits. This exemption has also been extended to appeals for donations in kind for foreign causes. We are revising our regulations to keep up with the needs of the charity sector. We intend to exempt small-scale and private fundraising appeals from certain requirements. We will review the administrative requirements on fundraising, including for foreign causes, an issue that was raised by Mr. Ng. This framework of scoping the regulatory requirements through the regulations allow us to be nimble and responsive to the needs of the sector and the public. Mr. Ng referred to an 80-20 rule as a barrier to fundraising for foreign causes. The 80-20 rule stipulates that with regard to fundraising for foreign charitable purposes, at least 80% of funds collected by the fundraiser must go towards charitable purposes in Singapore. This ensures that resources are not collected from the public for overseas causes at expense of local needs. Mr. Dennis Tan also asked for my views on this matter. We have reviewed this and we felt that at this point in time, the 80-20 rule will remain for now. I would also like to point out that the Commissioner can and does, on a case-by-case basis, waive this rule to support, for example, appeals in aid of providing immediate humanitarian and disaster relief. Many members, Mr. Gan Thiam Poh, Mr. Louis Ng, Mr. Denise Phua, Ms. Melvin Yong, Ms. John Pereira, Ms. Dhanalakshmi, have spoken on the proliferation of online fundraising appeals and asked how we regulate these appeals. Allow me to explain that the Act is not of extraterritorial application. If the appeal is conducted by an individual residing overseas and it is not targeted at residents in Singapore, the appeal may not be deemed to be carried out in Singapore. Such appeals are not regulated by the Commissioner as we do not have extraterritorial jurisdiction. The same applies to crowdfunding intermediaries. Where a fundraising appeal falls under our purview, the Commissioner will investigate if contravention of our regulations is suspected. This includes investing cases of alleged misrepresentation or half-truths that members spoke about. members of the public should report suspicious fundraising appeals to the Commissioner. And where irregularities are found, the Commissioner can stop the appeal and direct a fundraiser to refund donations collected, a point that Mr. Melvin Yong have asked. Members have called for greater regulation in the online sphere. We recognize that online platforms bring convenience to donors and have the potential to expand the reach and impact of fundraising campaigns. Given the ease of conducting online fundraising appeals and the speed with which funds are raised, the online channels are proliferating. Coupled with the anonymity of the internet, regulating the online fundraising sector is a complex and difficult task. Our approach is one of co-regulation, where a safe online giving environment is a shared responsibility. We are collaborating with the sector, specifically the crowdfunding intermediaries. By co-developing a practical and workable code of practice, we aim to set an industry standard of good practices that will instill transparency and accountability in the sector. We will create greater awareness and nudge both intermediaries and fundraisers in the online sphere towards complying with the code of practice. The best practices in the code include conducting due diligence to ensure the legitimacy of appeals, providing up-to-date information on funds raised and fees charged, and maintaining proper records of donations received and disbursed. Under the code, crowdfunding platforms will require fundraisers to declare their awareness and compliance with key regulatory requirements when using their platforms. This serves to remind fundraisers of their duties and obligations of providing information that is complete and true, and ensure that funds raised are used only for the declared objectives. While the code of practice will not be made mandatory, the Commissioner will lend weight to promote its adoption. The Commissioner will publish the list of compliant platforms and encourage the public to donate through these intermediaries. While we put in place regulations and guidelines on the fundraisers, donors have a part to play in practicing safe giving, both in the online and offline spheres. We are stepping up public education efforts to empower the public with the knowledge and skills to better differentiate legitimate appeals from those that are not. We will customize our safe giving guidance for different segments of the population to ensure effective communication. This could range from hard copy infographics for the elderly to posts and references on social media. Members have raised several suggestions on enhancing governance, transparency, and accountability of charities. We agree that these attributes are key to gaining the trust of donors. However, we are mindful of the compliance costs that are imposed on charities, a point that Ms. Denise Prath has raised. We are therefore constantly weighing the benefits and costs of regulation to be imposed and seeking to strike the right balance that she has talked about. About 50% of charities in Singapore have annual receipts of less than $250,000. The majority of our charities conduct their activities responsibly, so we agree totally with Ms. Cha's point. Given the profile of our charities, we have assessed that an annual reporting requirement is adequate for the sector. This is in response to Mr. Gan's point. Charities are required to submit an annual report containing a review of their activities as well as the financial statements which are published for public access. For IPCs and larger charities, they are subject to more stringent requirements such as audits by a public accountant and disclosure requirements in line with accounting standards. This includes disclosures in the charity's financial statements on related party transactions, as well as explanatory notes on the use of funds. If there is a reason, such as in the case of a charity being investigated, the Commissioner will require more frequent updates on its activities and financials. As part of the review, I would like now to clarify on certain points raised by members on the reporting requirements for registered charities and exempt charities, and a point that Ms. Yong has raised. As part of the review, the Commissioner also took the opportunity to clarify the regulatory requirements that will apply to registered charities and exempt charities which enjoy tax benefits. In response to Ms. Chia, we do have charities which are not successful in their application for registration as they do not meet certain requirements, such as having a purpose that's substantially beneficial to the community in Singapore. So there are certain reporting requirements that do not apply to these charities that have not been successful in registration. In addition to regulatory requirements, the Code of Governance for charities and IPCs apply. The Code of Governance serves as a best practice guide in key areas of governance and management and comprises tiered guidelines depending on the status and size of the charity. Members have suggested to make the code mandatory. To accommodate the diversity in governance structure across charities, we believe that the current comply or explain principle is relevant. Charities' reasons for non-compliance with the code will be published. Commissioner takes into account the reasons for non-compliance with the code in assessing a charity's application for IPC status and in selecting charities for review. On members' concerns about controls on the use of funds raised, points mentioned by Mr. Kan Tian Po and Ms. Thanalakshmi, charities are currently required to cap their fundraising expenses in any given year to not more than 30% of total funds raised. The board members of a charity have a fiduciary duty to ensure that the charity is governed and managed responsibly by ensuring that funds are used prudently and in accordance with the intended purposes. Nevertheless, we agree with the members that more can be done so that stakeholders have greater clarity on how a charity's funds are used. The Commissioner will be developing a guide to help all charities, big and small, put out key information, both financial and non-financial, in a manner that will help donors and other stakeholders understand the financial position, use of donations, and activities of a charity. Several members have raised points on the powers and provisions relating to the protection of charities, donors, and charitable assets. Ms. Cha Yong Yong, Mr. Melvin Yong, Ms. John Pereira, Ms. Thanalakshmi, Mr. Alex Yam, and Ms. Denise Phua have raised some points. In proposing amendments to the Act, due consideration is given to ensure that the powers given to the Commissioner are fair, reasonable, and essential with sufficient safeguards in place. The bill proposes to allow the Commissioner to extend the suspension of persons from their positions in the charity and suspend improper fundraising appeals. The total period of such suspensions, including any extensions of the suspensions, are proposed to be capped at 24 months. Ms. Cha has asked whether such suspension should be extended to 24 months in the first instance, while Mr. Yong is concerned with the potential disruption to the charity during the suspension. We have assessed the proposed increase from 12 to 24 months to be fair and reasonable. It should be noted that when the Commissioner orders a charity to suspend an improper fundraising appeal, the suspension does not prohibit the charity from conducting other fundraising appeals. So, for example, if the fundraising appeal in question is for a building of a new facility, the charity can continue to raise funds for its operations while the questionable appeal is being suspended. During any period of suspension, as with any serious situation requiring the Commissioner's intervention, the Commissioner will work closely with the governing board of the charity to ensure the continuity of its operations and services. We may review the necessity to extend the suspension period further later. On the disqualification and removal regimes, our objective is to ensure that charities are managed by fit and proper persons who will help maintain public trust and confidence in the sector. Hence, to strengthen the regime, the bill proposes to explicitly provide that persons convicted of terrorism, terrorism financing, or money laundering will be disqualified. Ms. Tana Lachmi asked if the risk is real. The Financial Action Task Force, which is an intergovernmental standard-setting body for combating money laundering and terrorism financing, has in recent years noted the increasing role of non-profit organizations in terrorism financing. FATF has recorded over 100 cases worldwide of alleged abuse of charities for terrorism financing. The risk is therefore real and increasing, and that's the reason for us to strengthen our legislation in this regard. And I will take note of Ms. Tana's advice for us not to stress that this only relates to charities with an object in religion. Mr. Alexiam queried about the number of money laundering or terrorism financing cases that the Commissioner has investigated. While we have not taken action under the Act against charities for money laundering or terrorism financing related offences, the Commissioner has carried out targeted reviews and worked closely with the law enforcement agencies to monitor the vulnerabilities that the charity sector may be exposed to. It will only take one case of a charity in Singapore being involved in money laundering or terrorism financing to shake public confidence in the charity sector as well as in the wider sector, including the finance sector. The proposed amendment, therefore, seeks to strengthen our regulatory regime in light of emerging risks and signals our commitment to ensure that charities are not misused to provide a front for such unlawful activities. Member has also asked about the permanence of disqualifications where spent convictions are involved. As mentioned in my earlier speech, where a person is disqualified under the Act on the ground of a criminal conviction, such as for an offence involving dishonesty, the disqualification ceases once the conviction becomes spent or the person receives a pardon for the offence. Removals under the Act, on the other hand, are permanent. If a person is removed on the ground of a criminal conviction of an offence involving moral turpitude, he will be permanently barred from returning to that charity as a board member or key officer. The permanence is intended as the cause for removal is serious in respect of the charity that he is serving and is the result of deliberate consideration. In the case of removal after inquiry for mismanagement or misconduct, the removed person is barred from key positions in the rest of the sector. On the protection of charities governing on the protection of charities governing board members, as raised by Ms. Denise Phua, we acknowledge the responsibility placed on governing board members of our charities. As trustees of public fund, they must act with reasonable care and skill to lead charities to do good work well. The law protects those who have acted honestly and reasonably from personal liability. And in response to Mr. Dennis Tan's point earlier about difference between board members and key officers, there are two separate groups of persons as mentioned in the Act. Board members would include all board members. Key officers will be officers in the company or in the charity that has influence on key decisions and is involved in the control of management and operations of the company. So some Board members could also be assuming key officers' role, but they are two separate categories altogether. So it doesn't mean that a key officer who is not a board member will be relieved of its obligations. A key officer will be restricted, as we define it, to a few persons that have management control of the outfit. So typically, in a very small charity, that probably would relate to the general manager or the CEO. We echo members' call for greater support for charities. The Commissioner supports charities on three fronts. First, on capability building. We are working closely with the Centre for Non-Profit Leadership to reach out to professionals with a heart to serve and pair them up with charities who need help. Ms. Chia Yong-yong, Ms. Denise Phua have made a very strong case, a very convincing case about the need for the sector to attract talent and to professionalize the sector. We totally agree with them. The Commissioner will work with partners, including professional bodies, to engage charities and to share know-how. Town hall sessions, annual charity governance conference are some examples of capability building efforts. In 2017, more than 1,600 participants attended our learning events. Second, on processes. The Commissioner is looking at simplifying regulatory reporting with a focus on effective reporting. This will be of particularly helpful to smaller charities. Third, on costs, the Commissioner is working with partners such as the apex organizations to set up shared services that charities can tap on. Ms. Joan Pereira has spoken about it. Ms. Chia Yong-yong has called for collaboration. These shared services may explore the suggestions brought up by these members to assist charities which are experiencing either temporary problems or to help strengthen their compliance, governance, and effectiveness. Charities can also tap on the VWO's Charities Capability Fund to support their efforts in improving their governance and management capabilities. On electronic filing, in response to Mr. Melvin Yong's question, fewer than 100 of our registered charities are still filing hard copy submissions. So the large majority of the rest of the 2,200 or so charities have also already gone onto electronic filing. To assist these charities, we provide support via the VWO Charities Capability Fund for the purchase of computers. They may also tap on the shared services facilities mentioned earlier. Next, working with our stakeholders and customizing our regulatory approach. Ms. Denise Phua made a wonderful speech calling for greater customization of our regulatory approach. We recognize that the charity sector is diverse and reaches out to different parts of the society. To this end, the Commissioner works closely with different stakeholders to achieve our shared vision. The Commissioner is assisted by the 5 sector administrators in various ministries and agencies, MOH, MOE, MSF, who will best understand the needs of their respective sectors, including which are the ones that are working closely with them, providing essential services that are required to serve the needs of the communities. They serve as point of contact for the charities in their sector and work closely with the Commissioner to ensure consistency in the regulatory stance and effective regulation. Many of our capability building initiatives are also tailored based on the needs of the respective sectors. For instance, following the launch of the refined Code of Governance in April 2017, we worked with different partners, including apex organizations for different sectors, to conduct sharing sessions on the code for their respective sectors. We will continue to assess how to better customize in our future reviews. Deputy Speaker, I'd like to thank the members for raising many good suggestions, including on the powers of the Commissioner to better protect charities, the specifics on the electronic transaction service, the regulatory approach towards charities, an industry transformation map, and preparing for a new sector where a new model of charities should be envisaged and should be implemented. We are fully supportive of these suggestions. We will take them into consideration as for the next round of the review. I would like to conclude by thanking members once again for their support for the bill and for their valuable comments. As fellow members have rightly expressed, trust is key to the charity sector. The underlying objective of our proposed legislative amendments is to enhance this trust. In proposing the amendments, we have also held fast to our commitment of a balanced regulatory framework. We want to have a charity sector that not only has the trust and confidence of the public, but also one that is healthy and thriving. It is our goal to nurture a charity sector that remains driven by the community. We will continue to encourage co-regulation and a culture of transparency, and our regulatory approach will reflect this. Sir, everyone has a role to play in achieving this goal. We will continue to work with partners such as the Charity Council and professional bodies to help charities strengthen their capabilities and governance. We are encouraged by the vision that leaders of the sector, such as Ms. Chow Yong-yong, Ms. Denise Phua, have painted for us, and we are committed to supporting such ground-up initiatives. We will step up public education efforts to empower donors to give wisely, to donate with both the head and heart. Charities, too, need to ensure that they are well-governed and accountable to win the trust of the public, especially their donors and volunteers. Together, our efforts will help the charity sector flourish. A healthy and vibrant charity sector is the bedrock to a caring and cohesive Singapore. Mr. Speaker, sir, I beg to move.